As we learned earlier in this video, all living things are made of cells. And sometimes they need to get more cells for growth or repair. That's where mitosis comes in. Mitosis is a cell dividing. Here's a quick look. It all starts in the nucleus, where the chromosomes form from the DNA. Remember that chromosomes are DNA tightly wound around histone proteins, just like thread around a spool. As the nucleus disappears, the chromosomes will start to migrate toward the center of the cell. This is metaphase. The spindle fibers attach to each chromosome at a place called the centromere. And eventually, the sister chromatids are pulled toward opposite poles of the cell. And one cell starts to pinch off to form two. Nuclei reform and you have two new cells from one. That's mitosis. You can kind of think of it like copy machines. You use a copy machine to duplicate papers, just like a cell uses mitosis to duplicate itself. It is very important to note that the DNA must also be copied before the cell divides, so that each new cell will have a full set of DNA instructions. So what do we use mitosis for? Well, anytime you have a wound, it has to be repaired, whether it be a minor cut like this or a major injury. But in this case, the cells around the wound will start to undergo mitosis to create new cells to make new skin to fill in the wound. Here's a broken bone. The same thing will happen here. The bone cells around the break will start to undergo mitosis and heal the bone. Growth is also important. Mitosis is what provides growth. You don't get bigger because you get bigger cells. You get bigger because you get more cells because of mitosis. Here's my daughter as a newborn. Here she is as a toddler. She didn't get bigger cells, she simply got more cells over time because of mitosis. Those cells were dividing. And here she is now. So as you can see, people grow, organisms grow because of mitosis. So how did this all start before you started growing? Well, a whole bunch of sperm went out seeking one single egg. And eventually, one of them was lucky enough to break through and fertilize that egg, successfully uniting your DNA. Half came from mom, half came from your dad. So sperm plus egg gives you what's called a zygote. That was the first cell that was to become you. So here you can see the development from ovum, which is the egg cell, fertilized, all the way through about a 15-week fetus. There was growth there because mitosis occurred. And to get from just generalized cells to specific cells, cells had to do what's called differentiate. So in cell differentiation, kind of generic cells become very specific cells like bone and muscle cells and nerve cells. So all the different kinds of cells you have in your body today all originated from those original generic cells that first started out from the zygote. Up next is meiosis. Meiosis is the way that organisms produce sex cells, cells they'll use to reproduce. As you can see here, you start with one cell at the top. It divides not once but twice to form four cells at the bottom. Those four cells are gametes. In other words, they're sperm or egg cells that will participate in fertilization that we saw earlier. When organisms create sex cells, they want to promote genetic variation, and they do it using a process called crossing over. In crossing over, two homologous chromosomes, one came from each of your parents, we'll say the blue came from dad and the yellow came from mom. They'll match up. And then one arm of a chromosome crosses over, which is why it's called crossing over, the arm of the other chromosome. And then something kind of unusual happens. Equal portions of each chromatid break off. Each of these portions contains identical types of genes, but possibly different variations of them. Then they switch places. This creates new combinations of genes to be passed on to offspring. Later on in the process of meiosis, these same two chromosomes will split again. This will yield 4 genetically different sister chromatids that will be passed on via the sex cells to the offspring. These 4 are seen here. Let's take a look at each one. The all blue represents what you got from your father. If you pass this on to your offspring, you're essentially passing on what your father gave you. This one, made mostly of yellow, and a small section of blue, is partly your mother and partly your father. This one is also a combination of your parents, but more so your father than your mother's DNA. And lastly, this piece, all yellow, came from your mother. So you can pass on 4 different combinations of chromosomes. It's like getting a roll of genetic dice. Randomly, you will get one of those combinations, just like you roll dice. The next concept we need to look at is called the law of independent assortment. This law states that chromosomes will line up randomly when undergoing cell division. That randomization leads to different combinations of chromosomes in the resulting gametes. Look at the example on the left. Here you see both red chromosomes line up on the left and both blue on the right. Whereas in the scenario on the right, you see that there is 1 red and 1 blue on the left, and 1 blue and 1 red on the right. So it's a random alignment that's going to result in different gametes. For example, the first gamete on the far bottom left would pass on brown eyes and black hair to the offspring. The next gamete would send on blue eyes and red hair. But look at the opposite scenario. If they had aligned that way, you'd be passing on brown eyes and red hair. Or, in the final gamete, blue eyes and black hair. So the randomization of the gametes gives different genetic combinations. And don't forget about random fertilization. It's kind of a crapshoot as to which sperm will actually fertilize the egg. So that also is random and also leads to potential genetic variation within offspring. It's just that one lucky sperm that will pass on its genes.
I don't